My phone buzzed with a priority alert while I was conducting a briefing at Al Udeid Air Base. Federal Tracking Alert. Military decorations with ID numbers AF2847-R and AF3901-S detected an unauthorized commercial sale. I stared at the message in confusion until I realized those were my metal identification numbers from the shadow box in my apartment back home. Someone had stolen my military decorations and was selling them online, triggering an automatic FBI investigation. But who had access to my apartment? The answer came 3 hours later when my sister Ashley called me in hysterics. "Rachel, there are Pentagon agents at my door asking about your stupid medals. What did you do to me?" What I hadn't done was anything. She had unknowingly committed a federal crime, and the government's tracking systems had found her faster than she could spend the money. The financial bleeding began 8 years earlier when my sister Ashley called me from her freshman dorm at Arizona State University, sobbing about unpaid tuition bills and threatening academic suspension. I was a second lieutenant stationed at Lackland Air Force Base, earning barely enough to cover my own expenses, but Ashley's tears and my mother's guilt-inducing phone calls convinced me to drain my savings account to keep her enrolled. "Rachel, you're the only one who can help," my mother pleaded during one of our weekly phone calls. "Ashley has so much potential, but college is so expensive now. Your military benefits give you security that she doesn't have." The narrative that my military service provided security while Ashley faced uncertain civilian challenges became the family justification for a financial arrangement that would define our relationship for the next decade. Every deployment bonus, every promotion pay raise, every hazardous duty stipend was immediately claimed by Ashley's escalating lifestyle demands. "I need help with rent this month," became Ashley's standard greeting whenever my number appeared on her phone. "The sorority fees are higher than expected," or "my car needs repairs," or "I have to have the right clothes for recruitment events." I was deployed to Iraq during Ashley's sophomore year, earning combat pay and hazardous duty allowances that made my military salary sufficient to support 2 people. But instead of building savings or investing in my own future, every dollar of deployment income was transferred to Ashley's checking account to fund a college experience that increasingly resembled an extended vacation. "You're overseas anyway," Ashley reasoned during one of our satellite phone conversations, "so it's not like you need to spend money on anything fun. This is helping both of us. I get to focus on my education instead of working some terrible job." What Ashley described as focusing on education actually meant maintaining a social media presence that required constant investment in clothes, travel, and lifestyle content that generated modest advertising revenue but cost far more than it earned. Her Instagram account, @AshleyLifestyle, documented a carefully curated college experience that looked like a luxury resort vacation funded entirely by my military deployments. But the most infuriating aspect of our financial arrangement was Ashley's systematic dismissal of my military service as less challenging and meaningful than her struggle to maintain social media relevance while completing a communications degree. "You just follow orders all day," she explained during one particularly condescending phone conversation. "I'm building a brand that requires creativity and business skills. Your military job is basically guaranteed income, but I'm taking real risks trying to build something from nothing." I listened to this assessment while coordinating combat logistics in Anbar province, managing supply chains that kept American forces operational in hostile territory where tactical errors could result in deaths. But Ashley's understanding of military service was entirely theoretical, shaped by movies and media, rather than any actual comprehension of operational demands or strategic responsibility. After my Iraq deployment, I was promoted to captain and assigned to pilot training at Laughlin Air Force Base, beginning the most demanding phase of my military career. The academic and flight training requirements consumed 18 hours daily, but Ashley's financial demands continued escalating as she approached graduation and began planning her transition to full-time social media entrepreneurship. "I need startup capital for my influencer business," she announced during one family dinner, her tone suggesting this was a reasonable request rather than another demand for subsidy. The equipment and professional photography for serious content creation requires significant investment. The startup capital amounted to $15,000 for cameras, lighting equipment, editing software, and what Ashley described as brand development consulting, essentially paying other influencers to teach her monetization strategies that rarely generated sustainable income. Her Instagram account, @AshleyLifestyle, documented a carefully curated college experience that looked like a luxury resort vacation funded entirely by my military deployments. But the most infuriating aspect of our financial arrangement was Ashley's systematic dismissal of my military service as less challenging and meaningful than her struggle to maintain social media relevance while completing a communications degree. "You just follow orders all day," she explained during one particularly condescending phone conversation. "I'm building a brand that requires creativity and business skills. Your military job is basically guaranteed income, but I'm taking real risks trying to build something from nothing." I listened to this assessment while coordinating combat logistics in Anbar province, managing supply chains that kept American forces operational in hostile territory where tactical errors could result in deaths. But Ashley's understanding of military service was entirely theoretical, shaped by movies and media, rather than any actual comprehension of operational demands or strategic responsibility. After my Iraq deployment, I was promoted to captain and assigned to pilot training at Laughlin Air Force Base, beginning the most demanding phase of my military career. The academic and flight training requirements consumed 18 hours daily, but Ashley's financial demands continued escalating as she approached graduation and began planning her transition to full-time social media entrepreneurship. "I need startup capital for my influencer business," she announced during one family dinner, her tone suggesting this was a reasonable request rather than another demand for subsidy. The equipment and professional photography for serious content creation requires significant investment. The startup capital amounted to $15,000 for cameras, lighting equipment, editing software, and what Ashley described as brand development consulting, essentially paying other influencers to teach her monetization strategies that rarely generated sustainable income. I provided the funding while simultaneously completing flight training that would qualify me as an Air Force pilot, a professional achievement that Ashley couldn't comprehend but never bothered to acknowledge or celebrate. "Flying planes is cool," she said with casual dismissal when I earned my wings, "but it's basically just a government job with good benefits. I'm building something that could make millions if the right content goes viral." The comparison between military aviation and social media entrepreneurship revealed Ashley's fundamental misunderstanding of both professional domains, but her confidence in her chosen path remained absolute, despite requiring constant financial support to remain operational. The breaking point should have come during my deployment to Afghanistan, when Ashley's demands reached levels that exceeded my entire military salary. But here's what really hurts. I kept paying because I thought family loyalty meant enabling her dreams, even when those dreams were built on my sacrifices. Comment love if you've ever supported someone who never appreciated the cost. I was stationed at Bagram Airfield, flying combat missions in support of Special Operations Forces, when Ashley called with her most audacious financial request, $25,000 to fund a lifestyle brand launch that included professional website development, inventory for a clothing line, and marketing campaigns across multiple social media platforms. "This is my big break," she explained, with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed that sufficient investment could guarantee social media success. The consultant says I'm positioned to become the next major lifestyle influencer if I can fund the initial marketing push properly. I was earning combat pay and flight pay that made the amount technically affordable, but providing it would consume every dollar I had saved during 3 years of military service. More importantly, it would represent a level of financial commitment to Ashley's entrepreneurial fantasies that exceeded any investment she had ever made in her own success. Ashley, I said carefully during our encrypted phone conversation, $25,000 is more money than most people make in half a year. What happens if the brand launch doesn't generate the income your consultant promised? Ashley, you don't understand how influencer marketing works, she replied with the condescending patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. This isn't gambling, it's strategic business investment in a proven model. The consultant has helped dozens of influencers build six-figure businesses. The consultant, whose credentials Ashley never verified and whose proven model remained mysteriously vague, had convinced her that success was simply a matter of sufficient capital investment rather than content quality, audience development, or market understanding. Against my better judgment, influenced by family pressure and my own misguided sense of loyalty, I transferred the $25,000 to Ashley's business account while sitting in a combat zone where American forces were engaged in active operations against enemy forces. The lifestyle brand launch was a spectacular failure that generated less than $3,000 in revenue over 6 months before Ashley abandoned the entire project to pursue what she described as more promising opportunities in the influencer space. But the most devastating aspect of Ashley's business failure wasn't the lost money, it was her complete lack of accountability or gratitude for the sacrifice that had funded her entrepreneurial experiment. The timing wasn't right for that particular brand concept, she explained with casual dismissal when I asked about the failed business during my post-deployment leave. The market shifted toward different content types before we could establish momentum. No acknowledgement that I had provided her entire annual income while earning it in a combat zone, no recognition that her failed business had consumed savings I had accumulated through months of dangerous flying missions. No understanding that military deployment pay was earned through sacrifices she couldn't comprehend. Instead, Ashley was already developing plans for her next business venture, a wedding planning and lifestyle blog that would document her upcoming marriage to Caleb Rodriguez, a fellow social media entrepreneur whose income sources remained mysteriously vague but whose lifestyle suggested either family money or credit card financing. Caleb and I are planning the most incredible wedding, Ashley announced during Christmas dinner, her excitement about event planning seemingly unrelated to any concern about funding sources. We want it to be content-worthy for both our brands, which means everything needs to be absolutely perfect. The wedding planning consumed Ashley's attention for 6 months, during which her requests for financial support continued at levels that exceeded her previous entrepreneurial demands. Venue deposits, photographer fees, dress alterations, catering upgrades, and what she described as content creation investments required constant infusions of cash that only my military salary could provide. This wedding will generate content for months, Ashley explained when I questioned the escalating costs. The investment in production value will pay for itself through sponsored posts and brand partnerships that the wedding coverage will attract. I was preparing for deployment to Kuwait when Ashley made the phone call that would permanently alter our relationship and trigger consequences neither of us anticipated. "Rachel, I need to ask you about those military things in your shadow box," she said with the casual tone she used when requesting routine favors. "The medals and ribbons and whatever, they're taking up wall space that I need for wedding planning materials." The shadow box containing my military decorations hung in my apartment's living room, displaying 8 years of service medals, campaign ribbons, and achievement awards that documented my progression from second lieutenant to major. The decorations represented deployments, training completions, and operational achievements that most civilians never encountered. Ashley, those are my military awards, I replied with growing alarm about where this conversation was heading. They're not decorations, they're official recognition of my service record. Okay, but some of them must be more important than others, right? She persisted with the logic of someone convinced that reasonable compromise was possible. Like, maybe you could keep the really meaningful ones and get rid of the extras that are just taking up space. The conversation concluded with my explicit instructions that Ashley was not to touch anything in the shadow box, that the medals and ribbons were federal property with legal significance beyond their personal meaning to me, and that interfering with military awards could have serious consequences. 2 weeks later, while I was processing pre-deployment paperwork at Al Udeid Air Base in Kuwait, Ashley made the decision that would permanently trigger the most devastating family crisis in our history and introduce her to aspects of federal law enforcement she had never imagined existed. She sold my military medals on eBay for $150, and the Pentagon's automatic tracking systems found her faster than she could deposit the money. The federal investigation began automatically, triggered by algorithms that monitored online marketplaces for stolen government property 24 hours after Ashley clicked List Item on her eBay account. While I was conducting pre-flight checks on an F-16 at Al Udeid Air Base in Kuwait, sophisticated tracking systems at the Pentagon were identifying the unique serial numbers embedded in my military decorations and cross-referencing them with authorized personnel databases. What Ashley didn't understand is that modern military awards contain microscopic identification chips and laser-etched serial numbers that link each decoration to specific service members, deployment records, and security classifications. The Bronze Star medal that Ashley had photographed for her eBay listing contained technology that immediately flagged its unauthorized sale to multiple federal agencies. The Office of Special Investigations received the first automated alert at 0347 hours Eastern Time, followed within minutes by notifications to the FBI's Stolen Property Unit, the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, and the Air Force Security Forces. By the time Ashley woke up in her Phoenix apartment, a multi-agency task force was already reviewing her digital footprint and preparing warrants for search and seizure operations. Here's what blew my mind. Ashley actually thought selling military medals was like selling old jewelry at a pawn shop. She had no idea she was trafficking federal property with embedded tracking technology. Comment shocked if you're amazed by how clueless some people can be about consequences. Agent Sarah Martinez from the FBI's Phoenix field office was reviewing Ashley's social media profiles while Ashley was editing wedding planning content for her Instagram stories. The investigation revealed a detailed digital trail of financial transactions between my military accounts and Ashley's personal banking, creating a comprehensive picture of our relationship and her access to my apartment. Subject appears to be family member with authorized access to victim's residence, Agent Martinez noted in her preliminary report. Social media activity indicates subject operates lifestyle brand with significant financial pressures and history of monetizing personal relationships for content creation. The federal assessment of Ashley's character was clinically accurate and devastatingly comprehensive. Within 18 hours, investigators had constructed a psychological profile that identified her as someone whose financial desperation and sense of entitlement made her likely to commit crimes against family members without understanding legal consequences. Meanwhile, Ashley was completely oblivious to the federal investigation that was systematically documenting her criminal activity. She spent the morning after listing my medals, planning wedding photography sessions and calculating how the medal sale would cover her venue deposit with enough remaining for upgraded catering options. "Finally got rid of those dusty military things taking up space," she texted her friend Madison with obvious satisfaction. "Made $150 and cleared wall space for my wedding planning boards. Rachel would probably never even notice they're gone." The text message, intercepted through a federal warrant on Ashley's electronic communications, provided investigators with explicit evidence of criminal intent and her assumption that I would remain unaware of the theft indefinitely. But federal tracking systems had already identified my location at Al Udeid Air Base and automatically notified my chain of command about the unauthorized sale of my military property. By 1400 hours local time, I was sitting in my squadron commander's office receiving the priority alert that would change everything. Major Morrison, Lieutenant Colonel Davidson said with the grave tone reserved for serious security violations, "We've received notification that your military decorations have been detected in unauthorized commercial sale. This triggers automatic federal investigation and requires immediate response." The formal language couldn't mask the personal devastation of learning that someone had stolen the physical representations of 8 years of military service while I was deployed overseas protecting American interests. "Sir," I replied with professional composure that masked inner rage, "I need to contact my family to determine how my awards were accessed without authorization." "Major, this is now a federal criminal investigation," Colonel Davidson replied with authority that indicated the situation had escalated beyond family disputes into matters of national security. 3 hours later, while federal agents were finalizing search warrants and arrest protocols, Ashley's phone rang with a call that would destroy her carefully constructed social media lifestyle and introduce her to consequences she had never imagined possible. "Ms. Ashley Morrison," came the authoritative voice of Agent Martinez, whose tone immediately indicated that this wasn't a social call or marketing opportunity. "This is Agent Martinez, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you immediately regarding federal crimes involving theft of military property. Are you currently at your Phoenix residence?" Ashley's confident influencer persona evaporated instantly as she processed language that suggested serious legal jeopardy rather than the minor inconvenience she had expected if anyone ever discovered her metal sale. "FBI?" she stammered, her voice carrying panic that would soon escalate to complete hysteria. "I don't understand. What federal crimes? I haven't done anything wrong." "Ms. Morrison, you've been identified as the seller of military decorations that belong to Major Rachel Morrison, United States Air Force. The sale of military awards without authorization constitutes theft of federal property and violations of multiple statutes regarding government materials." The technical language washed over Ashley like incoming artillery, each legal term representing potential prison time for crimes she had committed while believing she was clearing storage space for wedding planning materials. "But those are just metals," Ashley protested with the desperation of someone whose understanding of law came entirely from television shows. "They're just metal things sitting in a box. How can selling old metals be a federal crime?" Agent Martinez's response was delivered with the clinical precision that federal investigators used when explaining serious legal jeopardy to suspects who had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of their criminal activity. "Ms. Morrison, military decorations are federal property issued to specific service members under regulations that prohibit unauthorized transfer, sale, or disposal. Each award contains tracking technology that monitors its location and ownership status." She paused to let the implications sink in before delivering information that would complete Ashley's understanding of how sophisticated federal law enforcement had become. "Furthermore," Agent Martinez continued, "the decorations you sold include awards related to classified operations. Their unauthorized sale has triggered investigations involving national security protocols that require immediate federal response." Within 2 hours, federal agents were at Ashley's apartment door with search warrants, seizure orders, and arrest protocols that transformed her influencer lifestyle into a federal criminal case that would destroy everything she had built through years of social media manipulation. The search of Ashley's apartment was conducted with efficiency that reflected federal law enforcement's experience with technology crimes and evidence preservation. Agents seized her computers, phones, cameras, and financial records while documenting the living space that had been funded through systematic exploitation of my deployment income. Ma'am, we're also executing seizure orders for assets purchased with proceeds from criminal activity, Agent Martinez explained, as federal accountants began calculating the value of possessions that had been acquired through stolen military property and fraudulent use of my deployment income. Ashley's wedding planning materials, designer clothes, professional photography equipment, and luxury furniture were systematically cataloged as evidence in a federal investigation that would ultimately require her to prove the legitimate source of every significant purchase she had made over the previous 3 years. But the most devastating consequence wasn't asset seizure or criminal charges. It was the systematic destruction of the social media empire she had built through years of carefully curated content creation. News of Ashley's federal arrest spread through social media faster than any content she had ever produced, generating the kind of viral attention that destroyed influencer careers rather than building them. Her sponsors canceled contracts, her followers began abandoning her accounts, and her engagement rates collapsed as the story of her criminal activity became more compelling than any lifestyle content she could create. Influencer arrested for stealing military medals became a trending topic that generated millions of views and thousands of comments, none of which supported Ashley's claim that she had been unfairly targeted by overzealous federal investigators. Caleb Rodriguez, whose own social media career depended on association with successful influencers, canceled his engagement within 24 hours of Ashley's arrest. His breakup announcement, posted across all his platforms, carefully distanced himself from any involvement in Ashley's criminal activity, while expressing disappointment in her poor decision-making. "I can't build a brand partnership with someone facing federal charges," he explained in a video that generated more engagement than any content he had ever produced. The abandoned wedding planning materials remained scattered across Ashley's apartment floor as federal agents completed their investigation, seized her assets, and prepared the criminal case that would determine her legal future. My parents, who had spent years pressuring me to support Ashley's lifestyle and entrepreneurial fantasies, called me with desperation that exceeded anything I had experienced during combat deployments. "Rachel, you have to help Ashley," my mother pleaded during our satellite phone conversation. "She made a mistake, but she's still your sister. Can't you talk to the FBI and explain that this was just a misunderstanding?" "Mom," I replied with exhausted patience, "Ashley didn't make a mistake. She committed federal crimes by stealing military property that contains classified security features. There's nothing to misunderstand about theft of government materials." "But she's facing prison time," my father added with parental panic. "Surely the military can show mercy for family situations where no real harm was intended." The conversation revealed my parents' complete ignorance about federal law enforcement and their assumption that military regulations were somehow negotiable when family relationships were involved. 6 months later, Ashley pled guilty to theft of federal property and received 2 years of federal probation, 500 hours of community service, and restitution requirements that would take her years to satisfy. Her social media career never recovered, and she was forced to find traditional employment that provided steady income rather than the entrepreneurial freedom she had pursued through years of my financial support. I was promoted to lieutenant colonel and assigned to command a fighter squadron at Nellis Air Force Base, responsible for training the next generation of Air Force pilots in advanced tactical operations. The assignment represented the pinnacle of my military career and validation of 8 years of professional development that Ashley had never bothered to understand or appreciate. The shadow box containing my remaining military decorations now hangs in my squadron commander's office, where young pilots can see the progression of achievements that mark successful Air Force careers. The stolen medals were eventually recovered and returned to me, but they now serve as evidence exhibits that remind me about the cost of misplaced family loyalty. Ashley and I haven't spoken in 2 years. She sends Christmas cards with brief updates about her retail management job and her gradual progress toward paying off federal restitution requirements. But the relationship that was built on my financial support and her exploitation couldn't survive the revelation of her true character. Standing in my office at Nellis, coordinating training operations that prepare American pilots for combat missions worldwide, I feel the satisfaction of someone who finally learned that family loyalty must be earned through mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. I was Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Falcon Morrison, commanding some of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft, and I had finally stopped funding someone else's dreams at the expense of my own dignity. The vindication was complete, federal, and permanent. Sometimes the best lesson about consequences comes with handcuffs and federal probation. Sometimes the people who take the most from you appreciate it the least. If you've ever supported someone who saw your sacrifices as entitlement, if you've ever had family steal from you while you served others, if you've ever learned that federal tracking technology doesn't care about wedding plans, share your story below. Here, we honor those who serve with honor and watch karma work with federal efficiency.